Thank you very much, Genja. First of all, allow me to thank your invitation, your kind invitation to make this lecture in this important university. And allow me to thanks also to the Lozano Long Institute for Latin American Studies and for you, Fritz Steiner, to invite me to try to make a conversation between and among us. And also I want to underline that my English is not really very perfect, but I do my best to say what are we trying to show you in this lecture. I built this lecture in 3 levels. One discourse, one line about the idea of the historic cities. Then, in parallel, we're gonna see some important points about the policy on the World Heritage Committee since the beginning till now, in Latin American countries mainly, but also with the United States, because of course it's necessary to do that, being here. And in the third point, but in the last part of this conference, of this lecture, I will bring you some points of reflection that for me it's important to make some question. What are we now in this moment for the point of the historic cities? So here I have a general reflection, as the city has always appeared as a complex and random phenomenon, that one of the geographer, for example, always discover virgin or rural territories, but also always stopped at the gates of the city. In certain way, the city has always been an intangible object. If you remember well the Italo Calvino books, can you imagine what are the image and what are the complex idea of the cities? And that's why I put and underline this last sentence. In the beginning, there was a very, very important difference between the Hispanic America cities than in the Anglo-American cities since the beginning. You see that between the first date when the Spanish arrived in the American continent till 1810, more than 960 cities was founded. This is a huge number, and very important to see what were the policy of the Spanish crown. And John Eliot, as you may know very well, points out that the Spanish shared with the Mediterranean proneness toward the civic life, but it was made by Hernán Cortés since the beginning, when disembarking in Mexico. Unlike the Mayflower's Pilgrims Agreement adopted the other pattern. In the Hernán Cortés adopted the urban form since the beginning. This is a very important difference between the two policies of the British Crown and the Spanish Crown. And John Eliot pointed out very clearly this idea. The city was a keystone in the processes of a territorial occupation in the American continent by the empire of Charles V. It was a strategic role as a support to the roads of penetration and the control of the new wild ultramarine domains. In this process, a great quantity of Hispanic foundations were based on the indigenous pre-existence antecedents. Here you have an image for the Antigua Guatemala inscribed since the beginning on 1979. It was the first step of the inscription on the World Heritage list by some of the countries. Mexico not in this moment, but it was Peru, Guatemala, and some other countries, Latin American countries. It's important to say that their indigenous pre-existence antecedents were important mainly for Mexico and Peru, not for the rest of the territories, of course, because the most important population before were in Mexico and of course in the part of ancient Peru. This way accumulate a net of settlements with different range and vocation to occupy and spread the values of the Christian doctrine. And it was the key of the future development of the old Europe. Here you have one image of the historic town of Ouro Preto, which is a mining center in the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil. And it was described also in the first period in 1980. George Hubler pointed out that the adventure and the activity of the Spanish colonization have no parallel in the history. Also, if you look in the Roman period before. Here you have also another mining Olinda, Brazil, in 82. Mexico ratified only the Convention of World Heritage in 84, and we start to inscribe the first properties 3 years later, in 87. This net has accomplished change in administrative control that began in the Council of the Indies in Madrid and also in Sevilla, passing through the viceroys in the cities of Mexico and Lima, and reaching the alcaldías mayores and in the village and the city. Here you have the old La Habana Vieja, or the old La Habana, with the fortification system, inscribed in 82, also in this first period. And I underline this fact because to inscribe in the first step, if you can divide, this convention has already 43 years since the beginning. If you can divide in decades, in the first decade, you have many inscriptions of the historic cities, but with a very, very thin files. I mean, the rules of procedures were really very thick, and so it was nearly easy to put and to propose to inscribe the properties, and so in the beginning was a little bit easy. Yet today it's really difficult to propose one file, because we need nearly a treatise to do one file. If you we will speak later on with the proposal for the Franciscan mission in San Antonio. What are the difficulties for the United States right now to inscribe this kind of properties? And I repeat, in the beginning it was a little bit easy, because the convention needs the visibility all over the world. Later on, it became a very difficult step to go ahead. After 1521 up to the 1573, I mean the laws of India, the colonization, you see in those very few years were more than 180 cities founded by in New Spain and in Peru. Here you have also in 83 the inscription of the ancient city of Cusco, which was the ancient capital of the Inca Empire. I want to tell you that is very important. Here you have, for instance, the layout and the plan of the old city of Cusco has before the Inca settlement. So the Spanish layout, the Spanish traza, how you say layout, yes, is married with the new one. And if you go to Cusco, you see very clear the ancient foundations of the Inca Empire. Here you have the fortress of Cartagena, which was one of the main points in the South continent in America, now in Colombia. And then my reflection is how was the characteristic of the new forms in terms of typology and morphology along the 16th and 17th and 18th century, because the typology were so different. It was nearly one pattern, but the typology changed following the location of the cities. I mean, the port, the capital of the Viceroyum, how do you say?
Vice Kingdom, is it?
Yes.
Viceroyalty.
Viceroyalty, and then also the administrative centers, the mining centers, the rural. It depends on the location. Here you have a view of Salvador de Bahia, which the downtown of the called the Pelourinho. And here you have a very big difference between the Spanish and Portuguese towns, because here you have the heritage of the feudalism and the Middle Age in Europe and in Portugal. And in the Spanish town, there was another pattern, more like in the utopian times model. I mean in the Adamero, how do you say the,
Great.
uh,
Great.
no, it was not Greek, well, Roman company.
Great.
Yes. So here you have this kind of center in the Bahia, and you can have this heritage of the medieval times in Portugal. Later on, Brazil started to open the eyes and to try to be recognized in the modern heritage. And in 87, when Mexico started to inscribe also their properties, Brazil started with the recognition of Brazil as a city of the modern heritage, which was opening a new page in this part of the evolution of the World Heritage Convention. And this was a very important step to go ahead to recognize another types, typologies of the heritage. The committee was held also in 2010 in Brasilia. And it was a very important step of the evolution also with the point of view of the values of the properties in the list. Here you have a photo of the city of Potosí, which was inscribed also in the very beginning in 87. But now, one of the big challenges of the convention is, since the beginning, of course, is to preserve for the future generation this kind of properties. And you can imagine to conserve and to make a good conservation of the historic city is a big problem and a big challenge, because it's not always easy to see what are the pressure to make a good conservation. Now, in the Potosí Center, which is now inscribed on the World Heritage List in danger, they have a very big problem because they don't have all the tools for the management plan and to improve this kind of measure to conserve and to preserve in a good sense all the historic cities. They because the mining activity continues yet in this moment, and you can imagine that this is a very, very high city, more than 4,000 meters level from the sea level. So it's a really very difficult case to preserve in a good sense the pressure of the activity, and also for the new population who is arrive always to make these peripheral settlements. Here you have one photo of the Mexico City inscribed in 87, and our reflection has to do what are the measure to make a good conservation following the cultural and economic and social development of the certain region. As you can imagine, Mexico City has one of the biggest problems in the world at all, because we have to preserve the little town, the historic town, which is very well limited, but this part of the city has the pressure of 20 millions of the agglomeration of the big Mexico. So you can imagine how to manage well the policies about the pressure of all the population who has to come to the central region. Can you imagine that? For that, Mexico is always very awake to do a special policies for some of the towns, mainly for Mexico City. This is another historic city inscribed in 87, which is Oaxaca. It was inscribed beside the archaeological site of Monte Alban. But Oaxaca more or less has a good policy to be preserved for the future. And also, if we have some problems about the social situation in the Oaxaca state, the tourism has one very important activity to preserve Oaxaca, as Benjamin can show you some of the good examples of preservation of this colonial architecture in the south of Mexico. Here you have Puebla, who has also a good policy to preservation, the historic center of Puebla, and they have a good management plan. And the authorities, the local authorities, the mayor has, they have a very important tools of preservation in order to go online with the policies, the international policies underlined by the committee, the World Heritage Committee, which is the supreme authority to make clear what are the duties to preserve all the properties described on the World Heritage list. Here you have the historic center of Lima, described in 88, but Lima has some problems about the use of the uso del suelo, how do you say, the use of soil? Of the land use, okay, because not always is possible, and the migration of the original population to the south of the city was a very important movement, and so you have some of the historic buildings empty. So this is a very big question to answer. What are we dealing of this? In this photograph, you see a new historical buildings built in the 90s, 20s. So this is not the original colonial times. So sometimes you have to do what are we looking and what are we must preserve better. Guanajuato, which was described with the mines, also is a very alive city, and with some problems, but with some challenges to do that. They have a very important cultural life for the Cervantino Festival, and maybe I can say that they can go ahead with good policies also for the administration of the heritage. Here you have the Trinidad and the Valley of the Ingenios in Cuba, and which is a little city in Cuba, but which show a new typology with the industrial activity of sugar. The colonial city of Santo Domingo was described in 1990, and of course it was one of the first cities founded in Hispanic America. But the problem is that they have substituted many of the ancient buildings to the new one, and so you can have a little bit confusion what are really the heritage that we are seeing here. This is the historic center in Morelia, in the west of Mexico, a very well preserved colonial city. And here you have the Sucre in Bolivia. The first stage between 1490 and 1815 and modern colonization goes from the 1780 to 1940 centers in Latin American countries. This the industrialization and the creation of the new settlements and the exploitation where markets make a new view of what are the values of the historic center. Here you have in Venezuela the Coro and his port, and they have a lot of problems to make a good preservation because this is a very humble buildings in adobe. And so they are near the seaside, and so also the government doesn't have a good policy to make a good preservation. So this is inscribed on the World Heritage List in danger also. One of the big challenges of this historic space is to make a refunctionalization for the modern cities. Of course, in many cities in the historic cities, you don't have anymore the ancient activity. So you need to modernize and to make a renovation in the historic tissue and the historic net. Here you have a view of Mompox, which is along the Magdalena River, a very vernacular architecture which entered to the World Heritage in a second step to recognize what the values are not only monumental, but also because it was very close to the, how do you say, to put the value not in an important monumental size, but also in the soul of the people. And you will see that, for instance, this is Querétaro. In this part, in this photograph, you will see what I want to say to you. The historic quarter of the city of Colonial Sacramento was described in the second step, as I told you, in 1995. Maybe you are asking me why this center is on the World Heritage List. Maybe you can ask me, because this is for you, this is a very humble and very, how do you say, humilde, modest town. Ordinary. For me, I want to share with you one of the evolution of the concept on heritage. This is really a very important gap and very important different way to understand what are the values of the heritage. Believe me that it was a very big discussion to inscribe Colonia de Sacramento in Uruguay. It was a very, very good challenges to make and to understand to all the members of the committee. The committee is composed by 21 countries, which are always changing. Of course, like in all the international organization, you have 21 countries in the committee that each country can stay only 4 years, and then they change. And the composition of this committee is all over the world. I mean, 5 or 4 for Latin American and Central and Caribbean countries, 4 for Europe and North America, and 4 for East and Asia, and other for Arab states, and other 4 for African countries. So for Africa. So you propose to the committee, the consultative bodies, which are 3, are ICOMOS, International Council on Monuments and Sites, which is for cultural sector, the IUCN, which is the International Union on Natural Conservation, and the other, the ICROM, which is the Center of Conservation in Rome for UNESCO. They propose and they recommend to the members of the committee to inscribe, not to scribe, to defer or to postpone some of the properties. So the subsidiary bodies propose to recommend to inscribe this property, and all the countries are in the freedom to deliberate if it goes or not. When they inscribed in 95 Colonia de Sacramento, the big discussion was what are the importance of this city. And I can tell you that it was really very important at the time and of the history of this time, because it was the Treaty of Tordesillas, which was the fighting between the Portuguese crown and the Spanish crown. And so Colonia was also in this kind of dispute. It was a first period by Portuguese and then to Spanish. And then in this fight, finally they remain in Uruguay, which means in the Spanish crown. But so it is the testimony of this big important part of the period of the history of the world. I mean, and what is also important is that you may have that each property that each state party proposed has to show that they have outstanding universal value, and that's is the big question and the big difficulties in the discussion between the experts. But because I can ask you here in this room, what is outstanding universal value? This outstanding universal value is an evolution of the thinking of our expertise. In the beginning, it was very clear. Why not to describe the pyramids of Gizeh? Why not to describe the wall of the Chinese wall, la muralla china? Why not to describe the Fora Romana in Italy, in Roma? Why not to describe the Notre Dame in Paris? Why not? Everybody is agree with this value. But later on became more difficulty to recognize and to guess what are the deep sense of this kind of value. So it's in our concern that we must discuss how the thinking of evolution of these kind of concepts, no? So for me, this description makes a step ahead of this open view of what are we dealing with. Because now the list, the properties inscribed on the World Heritage List are 1,007 properties, which is really very, very important challenge for all the countries of the convention, because we have to preserve for the future these kind of properties. So each time is more difficult to inscribe whatever you want. Whatever you want is really very difficult right now. So here you have another kind of cities, Panama, which has a really very big challenges to be well preserved, because they wanted to inscribe on the World Heritage in danger, but they don't allow, and it's a very difficult political case, because there are many questions of economic interested in that part of the city, of the old city, because it's the core of the modern Panama, and you can imagine how is the growth right now in Panama City. It's really more than 8%. No, it's really very high. So the pressure in the downtown are really very big to preserve well. And they are making a kind of, how do you say, infrastructuras, facilities? No, roads, new avenues, new structures. Infrastructures. So you can imagine how they are changing the sense of the value of the ancient Panama la Vieja. So these, those are discussion in this committee, and to allow what are the authorities of Panama are thinking, they don't allow to be inscribed on the World Heritage List in danger. Because for some countries, this measure of the World Heritage List in danger is like a shame. You see, it's not taken in a good sense, because the Everglades in United States was inscribed for more than 20 years on the World Heritage List in danger. But for the United States, the World Heritage List in danger is a tool, in a sense, to get money and to preserve well this natural property. So you see, it depends of the point of view that you take this kind of tool of the convention. So you can have this appreciation that are opposites. Here you have San Luis de Maranhão, and so if you can have the text of this lecture, I will give you the line of this kind of phrases or that you see there. But for me, it's more important to tell you what are happening in between. We have some problems with the small cities in Mexico inscribed, because Tlacotalpan has only 8,000 inhabitants, but there is a lack of engagement between the population which are living there, that we have very big problems to deal with the interior problems between the population. It's an ironic case, but it happens. It happens. And the racial approach also allows a classification concerning the cities in the Spanish colonial towns and towns of Indians. That was in the beginning, the Republic of Indians and the Republic of Spanish. But it was really erased very soon. 20 years later on, this separation was impossible to deal with. This is this is the historic town of Diamantina, inscribed on 90. And this is Campeche, a very well preserved town in the peninsula of Yucatan. I was speaking about the two republics. Here you have Arequipa in the south of Peru. And I'm speaking about some of the operational guidelines and implementation for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention has underlined at that period in 1999 in the session of Morocco, has underlined the inconsistencies and the big gaps in the World Heritage List. Why? Because the list in the beginning, in the text of the convention, says that the list has to have a credibility based on the balance and the representativity. I mean, balance between the categories of the heritage, because the categories are really very different between the rock art, the modern architecture, the historic cities, or the, I don't know, the cultural roots, for instance. But also the balance between the geographical point of view. So in that sense, you see that the gaps were really very, since the beginning, were really very clear. And I will show you by figures what are we thinking about this big discussion between the policy each year. These are important just to have in mind the question. The historic cities in the World Heritage List are 193. But the organization of the World Heritage Cities, which is an NGO with help in Quebec, here near in Canada, has 265 cities. There are some difference between these kind of figures, but I can tell you one thing which is important to have behind us. Because the cities are the more representative category on the list. This is what, if you have in mind that 20% of all the list, which is a big difference between the other categories. Here you have the historic city of Paramaribo, which maybe the point of view of the heritage are not really very relevant, but it has to do with the with the little countries of the Caribbean, the Caribbean countries, and it was part of the Dutch colonies in that part of the interior sea. Here you have the Valparaiso, which has another point of view. What is heritage? Heritage, you can read whatever you want. I mean, there was a lot of big discussion if we are dealing with a big major or big monumental heritage, or we are trying to make what are happening is kind of harbor in the south of America. Believe me, also the Chilean people works a lot to go with this kind of submission, because not always is recognized by the rest of the people. Here you have Cienfuegos, a 19 heritage in Havana, and then the last one in Cuba was in 2008 as the historic center in Camagüey. And the last one we inscribed with a lot of difficulties was San Miguel Allende with the sanctuary of the Jesus Nazareno. And because San Miguel Allende represents another family of the historic cities. When you make a very profound analysis about the family of the historic cities all over the continent, you can identify at least 20 families, different families of historic cities. So, in the list, we have only about 5 or 6 families well represented. What happened with the others? This is the question. And we can put on the list San Miguel Allende, because San Miguel Allende is not a capital, is not a regional center, it's a little town, but very well preserved and with a very important heritage for the colonial times. So we can have a very good arguments for inscribe this settlement. So we have now in the last step of our lecture that I want to analyze with you. Latin American and Caribbean countries has 20% of all the historic cities all over the world. As you can see, Europe, in this question, North America, you can take with some of, how you say, yes, quotation mark. Why? Because at least North America, well, let me say you one thing, and that I was thinking always with you, with the North American region. For me, North America is part of the Americas. No? Canada and the United States is part of the Americas. Why put on the block for Europe? But this is a political and economic point of view for the UNESCO region that are distributed all over the world. Because if not, if you are talking about the issue of heritage, cultural or natural heritage, United States has to do more with the rest of the continent than with Europe. Even if we have to do with Europe, of course, why not? But for natural, is more clear than United States, is closer, of course, with Canada, but also with the south of the continent. Are you agree or not? Well, no, but to tell you that this part of the region and Europe here, North America contributes only for these 112 cities, only contributes at least 4 cities. 4 cities, not more. Lunenburg in Canada, San Juan de Puerto Rico, which is not really. Now I make some question about this reality. No, but it's very important to think about. It's really very important. To me, it's very important to share what happened with some of the question of this convention, because it's not the first time that we discuss this kind of principles.
So what are the other two?
And the other, all Quebec, the ancient Quebec, which is a lot of revealed. I mean, the authenticity, we can put an interrogation. No, but well, let's go with Les Quebec, Lunenburg, and the other city was maybe, well, the old town of San Juan, which is the fortress more. And maybe, I don't know, I really don't know, but maybe Taos Pueblo, maybe in Santa Fe, no, in New Mexico, maybe. But think, and then I will put some question that you will answer me if you can, and if you want, of course. No, here you have this question, which is really very important to think also. Africa also has only 8 cities. It's not the Arab states. Arab states are 21, and the Asia Pacific region has 15 cities. For me, there is a big rule for reflection and to make some thinking about that for the future, if you want. What represents an historic city for the identity of the people? This is the important question. Why the European think that they have in the cities a very important role of identity? But also, for the Latin American countries, it's not bad. I mean, it's important. We identify our identity in the town, isn't it? So okay. Well, so why do cities in the region of Latin American and Caribbean countries have a good representation of the world? I answered already. Why? Because I think this is a very important part of the sense of the heritage, but in a collectivity. This a collective mind in the heritage. And then we're gonna see what is happening with the historic urban landscape like Rio de Janeiro, because it's going to not to describe more historic cities, but to change the concept for historic urban landscape, which is a new concept of the same phenomenon. Here you have the list of cities, and you see that Mexico has 10 cities. Well, these are the representative typologies that at that time told you before. And you have the Fortaleza de Puerto Rico, Taos Pueblo, historic old Quebec, and old town of Lunenburg. So you will ask me, no, you will answer why the United States doesn't not inscribe cities on the world register. Because this is the list of the United States. I wonder to hear some about your opinions about that.
I think because maybe developers will have interests, like I said, they want to protect their potential income to build wherever, many times they want to, and this kind of clauses prevent them from doing that.
This is part of the answer, but not the official answer.
Part of the practical issue is
No, for instance, no, because maybe we can discuss later on, but I will put you on one thing that I was really important. For instance, when I was visiting many years ago, 20 years ago, Savannah is an amazing and a very well preserved historic town. Very, very important. And also the French quarter of New Orleans, which is important. And what are you saying about Raleigh or Charleston, for instance, the old districts? Some people of the United States give me some of the answers, but I want to know if they are right or what happened with the authorities of your government. No, it's a good question, because if not, you cannot make a good interpretation about the list and the categories.
Because the U.S. doesn't like the European oversight on their own heritage. They don't like it. Sort of a foreign organization is sort of watching what they do here. You know, a Paris, France-based organization. They kind of don't like that. That's what I've heard.
Like oversight, I think there's also just the tradition in the United States is on national parks and protection of natural areas. And that's well defined.
This is one of the main questions. Yes, yeah, you are right, of course. When you realize that question of the concept of the heritage is born more with the National Park Service, with natural mind of heritage than the cultural. We work very close with the National Park Service, let me tell you. We work together in many of the proposals of the United States. Mainly, we're gonna see this kind of, for instance, the cultural roots, which this is a really fantastic photograph of Juan Rulfo, which can show you what is the role. But this is, you can have your mind in the infinity of this kind of images. But one of the common project that we built with National Park Service was the first national trail in the United States between El Paso and Santa Fe. And it was a very good work with you. But later on, we inscribed already this cultural route in the session of the Brasilia in 2010, but in that period, the United States was not able to allow to inscribe this part because the dossier, the file was already done together with the National Park Service. But of course, the policy of the United States are different than our country. It's not question of discussion. But one of the points that you said has to do with this kind of what are the heritage, and it burned in the natural part and then in the historic. But it's not only the answer, it's part of the answer for me. But, well, I leave it on the wing. No, because for me it's interesting to think about what are happening. Because now, for instance, United States is proposing two sites that I know, which are really on the next door, which are the Franciscan mission of the San Antonio, Texas, which are already in the qualification for the consultative bodies, and we will have the answer very soon in the next month of May. And then you are proposed already in this part for the next year, the modern architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, part of the buildings of the Frank Lloyd Wright. So for me, it's interesting to make this interpretation what is happening, which with each list, and at least Mexico has a policy to inscribe another categories of heritage, natural heritage, not anymore historic cities, not anymore this kind of properties, but we are dealing with the Aqueducto de Padre Tembleque, which is a very important historic building on irrigation in the 16th century, an amazing aqueduct, which has in the Renaissance period. So we are dealing with other kind of typologies to be consistent with the policy of the committee. For instance, this was a very important point in 2011 to sign with Katalin, the ambassador of Hungary, with the Director General of UNESCO, Irina Bokova, signed the recommendation of historic urban landscape, which has, behind you have a Bandarin and Kishore to be testimony of this kind of new memorandum for historic urban landscape, which changed the point of view, not anymore for historic cities, but to change for the historical landscape. Yes?
When something is added to the list, when a city is added to the list, when it's accepted,
Yes.
what actually happens?
That
In the world, what changes?
Well, it changes that they are not recognized like that. I mean, Dresden was erased and was retired from the world architecture because they couldn't accept the policy of the committee that they couldn't build a new bridge which was changing the character, the historical character, the reason why they describe the city, you know, the criteria and the outstanding universal value.
So they get taken off.
They take it.
It's recognition. It's just the fact of being on the list.
Yeah.
And you then have a certain
They
status,
take out
and you can use
for the
it.
list and they can follow whatever they want.
It's similar to the National Register of
Yeah.
Historic Places.
It's a very good.
It's an honorary thing, but you can get the list that if you don't.
If you don't maintain the
In a sense, I can tell you that it's a very difficult and embarrassing problem because in some ways it's like a failure of the principles of this convention. You can imagine, not only for the country, but for the international community.
But one of the points I think about through this whole thing is like, actually that's a really interesting example, the Dresden example, because Dresden isn't frozen in time. It's a city that is living its life like the rest of the world is living its life, moving into the future.
But
Yes,
it was practically destroyed during World War II.
But then it was
Rebuilt.
rebuilt,
That's it.
and then when it's rebuilt, it starts
That's
to
the
live.
reason
Yes.
for it to be there.
yes,
But as it lives its life, in a case like this, it may come up that they need a new bridge. And a new bridge needs to be built because people are living there and new people are living there and things
yes.
change.
But if they are changing the characteristic that who has to do with the outstanding universal value, the outstanding universal value is composed by two elements, important elements. First of all, the criteria that they are choosing to inscribe. In the cultural sites, you have 6 criteria. 6. You can have it in the text of the convention, you go with what each criteria was means. For the natural sites, you have 4 criteria. So this is one point. And the other point is to deal with the integrity and authenticity of the properties. If you don't have those sides together, you are breaking and you are really destroying the discourse, and you are changing the recognized by the international community.
So to be recognized, you have to make a commitment.
Yes,
Yes. Then it becomes a struggle between
yes,
those who want change and those who want to keep.
Well, that's what it seems like. I mean, it seems like part of the issue is if you're making a commitment to recognize your city's value in the greater, cultural context of world history, and you're saying you're not going to change. You're accepting the fact that you're going to freeze your city in time.
Yeah. So
Yes.
if you're St. Peter's, you're saying you're not going to change the piazza at St. Peter's.
Yeah.
Well, this is the rub, is making a city continue to live or making it Disneyland.
yes,
that's
yes,
right,
the
that's what I'm trying to
authenticity,
get, right.
the authenticity, which is a very important part of this kind of heritage. Let me tell you one thing. The other property who was retired, who was taken out of the list, was the Oryx Sanctuary in Oman. Why? Because the Omani state, they don't want to deal nothing with this part of the territory because there was oil there. So how to preserve the sanctuary of this animal if they are interested in the oil, not with the animal? And it was described for the animal. I mean, not for the animal, but for the nature.
Taking as you cited Dresden, I'd like to answer the American question.
Yes.
I'm not American. I'm Australian, originally Brazilian, so I
Yes.
cannot answer for that.
Okay.
As I am here visiting, as a visiting scholar, I did some field work. I went to New Orleans and I went to San Francisco and Newport. And I cannot tell you with who I talked. But I asked this why there are no more significant application of American cities at UNESCO, for the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And they gave 2 reasons for this. One is they want to be free to do whatever they want to do.
Yes.
The second one is the economical development, like Dresden,
Yes.
is essential for that. I have been there last year. There is no point in take out Dresden from the list because of this bridge, because this bridge is not affecting the authenticity and the integrity of the historical center. Is affect, yes, when you read the city from one side, you can see that the bridge is affecting the landscape. But in contrast, with the essential infrastructure that this bridge
Yes.
means. Of course, they told me that people don't want to be in the world
Yes.
They want the bridge there.
Yes.
So it's exactly what happened here. They want the freedom, economical freedom, urban infrastructure freedom. So what I see is natural sites is easier to preserve because it's a natural site.
Yes.
So nobody will
not
build a
that-
shopping center there.
It's not that easy. I used to work for that.
Yeah.
Believe me, it's not that
Easy
easy.
was
You know,
mistake,
it's
but-
really, it's a different kind of complexity.
Yes.
The other thing though about the United States is, in Latin America, as you
Yes.
described, you have the laws of the Indies. So there was a very
Yes.
specific
Yes.
and very consistent strategy for settlement.
Yes.
And if you look in the United States, and you're true, about the freedom, I'm sure that's a big factor. But you look at the United States, and you take for a moment the Spanish
Yes.
out, which is major,
Yes.
and you take the French out, and then you just deal with the English.
Yes.
And all the English didn't get along that well. First of all, you have the people settling the South, which had a colonial, they were trying to create a feudal system. They were the second and third sons of the aristocrats. They didn't have peasants anymore, so they brought black people as slaves. So they built a slave economy. You contrast that with the Puritans in New England that had a town-based settlement, which was very different, and it was very free, except for if you
Yeah.
weren't, as long as you were a Puritan, it was very open. But if you weren't a Puritan, you got burned at the stake for being a witch. And then you throw in Quakers in Philadelphia,
Yes.
and they were a bunch of free-thinking hippies who were very different than these other two.
Yes.
So there were among just the English, three very different strategies, which arguably are still fighting to this day, of very different visions of what the United States should be. And that doesn't include the very significant Spanish and very significant French
Yeah.
parts. And then you throw in, other kinds of odd things like Germans and Poles and other things, which make it more complex. So I think that the freedom thing is certainly there, but I think it's more complex than that. I think that there's an inherently anti-urban bias in much of the United States.
But that's the perception of people, of preservationists that
Well-
I'm not American, I just asked them.
Well,
and that's the perception.
in any case, for me, it's very important, this discussion in the future between you and between us, because allow me and let me tell you that this reflection is not due in our discussion. It's a little bit, I don't know.
It's a sensitive point.
A sensitive
Yes.
point, and it's really difficult to go out with many things that we're, I don't know, thinking. For instance, Dresden was taken out of the list because they insist, when they inscribed already, Dresden was inscribed in 2003, and then 8 years later, it was taken out. Why? Because in the beginning they were very tricky. Because, no, why? Because they say that it was a cultural urban landscape that was inscribed because Goethe and all these romantic people of the Germany has put in a very fixed image the values of the city. The discourse was really very, how can you say, muy forzado. Forced,
Yes.
very forced, very artificial in some way, Well, when we are speaking of this historic urban landscape was because the people living in the historic of Vienna, center of Vienna, was trying to make a skyscrapers, outside of the historic cities, nevertheless, they were destroying a little bit the skyline of the historic values of the city. So it starts a very animous and very big discussion between what are the values of the whole city. So that's why they pay so many meetings in Vienna and in other parts of the world just in order to go ahead with the new concept.
Pancho, if you we are running a little bit out of time, so we can open it for questions.
No. Yeah, I finished already, and I want to show you that we have a World Heritage Cities program with Ron Panners, some people know here, and Modern Heritage, World Heritage in Sustainable Development, and we had some of the convention and the recommendation. This is the Vienna Memorandum I show you. And these are the declaration of UNESCO and ICOMOS, and those are the charters. You may know, and you have to have present very important charters made in Washington, the ICOMOS charter, no, in the historic cities in 2008 for the historic cities in Washington. You have a look for these charters, and these are our publication that we made in the past, in 2005, for the authenticity, and some are the World Heritage Center, and this is I brought the paradigms of the conservation, Venice Charter, and of course the indicators, which are very important tools to make a measures what is happening in the interior of the historic part of the cities. And some of work about the urban cooperation. We collaborate with this kind of work. And what are the challenges for the future? Conservation. And this is an alive organism. And they cannot investigate as an isolated way. And this is the dream of architecture, and you know very well. But Thomas Cole. Well, this is finished, and thank you very much for giving me your attention. And I think I was put some of the interrogation for the future with you, and we can exchange some whatever you want. Please contact me. You have all my things, my information with the people for this department. And thank you very much, Rainer, again for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.